So back in January 2026, you probably saw these headlines that just sounded wild, like something from another century. The United States wanted to buy Greenland. Yeah, you heard that right. Not partner up, not invest, but straight up buy it. The whole thing spiraled into chaos fast. You had diplomacy, threats, just total confusion. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and get to what was really going on.
And really, it all kicked off with this one statement from former President Donald Trump. He's at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and he says this. He basically frames the whole thing like he's buying a condo, a simple request for a place called Greenland. And that single line, it was enough to light a match under the entire diplomatic world.
And that really gets to the core of it, right? Is a country just a piece of property? I mean, can you really buy a nation with its own people, its own culture, a growing sense of its own identity, like it's just some plot of land? This whole idea just shakes the foundations of how we think about countries and sovereignty. So let's dig in and unpack this.
All right, first up, a deal for Greenland. Let's get into the conflicting reports that were flying around everywhere, because this is where things started to get really confusing.
Okay, so look at this. It's a perfect picture of the chaos. On one hand, you've got the US claiming there's a framework of a future deal in the works after a talk with the head of NATO. But then on the other hand, Denmark's prime minister comes out and says, whoa, hold on. The NATO chief has zero authority to negotiate for us or for Greenland. It was a classic he said, she said drama, playing out on the world stage.
So, with everyone saying completely different things, how do we get to the truth? Well, we have to go beyond the headlines. We need to look at the actual legal document that defines the relationship between Greenland and Denmark, and ultimately defines Greenland's own future.
And that brings us to the Self-Government Rulebook. Honestly, this single document is the key to understanding this entire situation. And here it is. This isn't just some political handshake deal. This is a formal, honest-to-goodness law. It was even lodged with the United Nations back in 2009, and it spells out, very clearly, the powers and the rights of the Greenlandic government.
You know, this journey toward autonomy for Greenland didn't happen overnight. It was a long process. It really kicked off way back in 1979 with Home Rule. But the huge moment, the real game changer, was in 2008. The people of Greenland themselves held a referendum, and they voted, overwhelmingly, for greater self-government. And that vote is what led directly to this 2009 act we're talking about.
Okay, and this right here, this is the bedrock of the whole thing. The act literally says that the people of Greenland is a people pursuant to international law with the right of self-determination. So what does that actually mean? It means they're recognized as their own distinct people. They have the right to decide their own future, to write their own story. It's a really big deal in international law.
And this wasn't just symbolic language. The act backed it up with real concrete power. We're talking about control over their own mineral and oil resources, and the money from that, it goes directly to Greenland. They also took over their own police, their own court system, even their own financial regulations. This is the nuts and bolts of a country running itself.
Which brings us to the million-dollar question, right? The one at the heart of this whole controversy. Who decides Greenland's future? If it were for sale, who actually has the right to sell it?
Well, the good news is, the answer isn't buried in a bunch of complicated legal jargon. It's right there, plain as day, in Chapter 8 of the Act on Self-Government. They call it the Independence Clause.
And here it is, Section 21. Decision regarding Greenland's independence shall be taken by the people of Greenland. I mean, it doesn't get any clearer than that. Not the government of Denmark, not the United States, not NATO. The decision belongs solely to the people of Greenland, period. This is the definitive legal answer.
The Act even lays out the exact roadmap. First, the people of Greenland have to decide they want independence. Then, and only then, do negotiations begin between Greenland and Denmark. Any agreement needs a yes from both parliaments, and get this, it has to be approved by another referendum in Greenland. See? It's an internal democratic process, not some international transaction.
Okay, so now that we have all that legal clarity, let's jump back to those headlines from 2026. Because now the official reactions start to make a whole lot more sense. Let's look at the view from Nuuk and Copenhagen.
So, when the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said this, she wasn't just making a political statement. She was literally upholding the law as it was written in the 2009 Act. Her position was a direct defense of the legal framework that both Denmark and Greenland had already agreed on.
But this quote from the Danish foreign minister adds a really critical layer of nuance. He says, that does not make the problem go away. The challenge is still there.
What he's saying is that even though the US had ruled out using force, the geopolitical pressure, that fundamental challenge to Greenland's sovereignty, it was still there. The legal answer was clear, but the political problem hadn't just vanished.
And this whole episode reveals something much bigger about our world, especially about the future of the rapidly changing Arctic region. This is about an unsettled Arctic future. So why does all this matter? Well, this wasn't just some bizarre news story. It was a real-world test of a people's right to self-determination. As the Arctic opens up because of climate change, its strategic value is just skyrocketing. We're talking shipping lanes, vast mineral deposits, critical military locations. And that creates this massive clash between the legal rights of smaller nations like Greenland and the ambitions of global superpowers.
Ultimately, when you boil it all down, the Greenland question is way more than just a diplomatic spat. It's a story about the core principles that are supposed to govern our world: sovereignty, the rule of law, and the fundamental right of a people to chart their own course.
And that leaves us with a critical question for the future. As the strategic stakes in the Arctic continue to rise, will the clear letter of international law actually be enough to protect the rights of the people who call it home? Or will might makes right become the new rule in the far north? That's something we'll all be watching.